April 17th, 1945. A grim camp in northern Germany. The British forces have finally breached the perimeter. They did not just find a prison, they found a graveyard. The air smells of sickness and burning. Among the captives stands a woman. She is young, she is blonde. This is Irma Grese. To the inmates, she is the beautiful beast. Why is she calm? The war is lost. The Allies surround her, but she stares down the soldiers without fear. The archival footage shows her uniform is pressed and neat. In the background, mountains of bodies lie in the mud. At first glance, a stunning beauty, but in reality, a sadistic killer. Her clock is ticking. In a few days, the cell door will lock. The trial will begin. The hangman will prepare the rope. She destroyed countless lives. She whipped prisoners until they collapsed. She sent children to their deaths. There is no regret in her eyes. But this was not always her life. To understand how a seemingly innocent girl became a monster, we must leave the ruins of the camp. We must go back to the beginning. October 1923. That was the date Irma Grese entered the world in Recken, Germany. She was the third of 5 children. Her father, Alfred, stood apart from his neighbors. He hated the Nazi Party. He forbade his children from wearing the brown uniforms. He chased recruiters away from the doorstep, but his morality stopped at the front door. Inside the house, he was a tyrant. Why did he hate the regime but terrorize his family? It was a contradiction that broke the household. The pressure outside was immense. The pressure inside was lethal. 1936 changed everything. Irma was 13. Her mother discovered Alfred's affair with a local pub owner's daughter. She didn't scream, she didn't pack a bag, she drank hydrochloric acid. It was a slow, agonizing death. Alfred's reaction was cold. He blamed the children. The beatings escalated. He struck them for the smallest mistakes. The sound of crying became the background noise of the Grese home. Irma retreated into silence. The archives show a young girl with a hard, unsmiling face in family photos. School offered no escape. Classmates threw insults, teachers turned a blind eye, her grades hit the floor. At 14, she packed her books and left the classroom forever. At first glance, a dropout with no future, but in reality, a perfect recruit for what was coming. She drifted. She worked on a farm, milking cows in the early morning cold. She tried working as a shop clerk. She tried an assistant nurse program. Nothing satisfied her. She felt small. She felt weak. But the anger remained. She wanted respect. She wanted fear. The Third Reich was ready to give her both. Her path was set. 1942, the year the humanity ended for Irma Grese. But the darkness found her earlier. Irma secured a position at the Hohenlychen Sanatorium. On paper, she was an assistant nurse. At first glance, a caregiver in a white uniform. But in reality, a student of torture. Here she met the Nazi doctor, Karl Gar. His reputation was already terrifying. He did not treat patients, he used them. Gar conducted experiments on living human beings. Irma did not turn away. She stood by the operating table. She handed him the instruments. She watched the scalpel slice through skin. The doctor taught her the twisted methods of cruelty. She absorbed every lesson. The victims were left with permanent physical scars. Irma was left with a shattered moral compass. Her time at the sanatorium was a cocoon. Inside, a machine of death was forming. She prepared to kill with absolute impunity. Events accelerated. In 1942, Irma joined the staff at Ravensbrück. This was the largest concentration camp for women in the Reich. It was a factory designed for one product: death, forced labor, torture, starvation. Why did Irma adapt so quickly? She had a mentor. She became one of 150 female supervisors. Her teacher was the brutal Dorothea Binz. Binz gave a simple instruction: extract maximum labor from the prisoners, work them until they drop, work them until they die. Irma listened. Irma obeyed, but this was only the beginning. The nightmare from her nursing days returned. Dr. Karl Gar appeared at the camp. The gruesome experiments restarted. The footage from history records the aftermath: twisted limbs and unnatural swelling. The doctors didn't use anesthesia. They used hammers. They shattered the legs of healthy women. They took knives and sliced open the flesh. They deliberately infected the wounds with bacteria. They rubbed glass and dirt into the muscle. Irma stood 3 feet away. The screams filled the room. The smell of gangrene hung in the air, but her face showed no disgust. Indifference turned into something darker. She didn't just watch, she reveled in it. A promotion followed. Irma became a supervisor. Now she held the keys. She controlled the food. She controlled the punishments. She grew addicted to this power, but it wasn't enough. She began to beat prisoners without provocation. She needed to hear their cries. She started carrying a heavy whip. She used it on anyone who showed a second of weakness. The crack of leather on flesh became her signature sound. Then came the selections. Irma stood at the railhead. She decided who would work and who would burn. Women, children, the elderly. They all fell victim to her whims. She scanned the lines of terrified women. She looked for beauty. If a prisoner was more attractive than her, she signed the death warrant. Jealousy became a lethal weapon. She sent them straight to the gas chambers. She was no longer a product of the environment. She was its embodiment. But the war did not last forever. The Third Reich began to crumble. The maps changed. In 1943, a transfer order arrived. Irma left Ravensbrück. She moved to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The scale of horror was about to reach a level the world could not yet imagine. Auschwitz-Birkenau, the epicenter of the largest killing factory in human history. It was here that Irma Grese earned a title that would outlive her, the beautiful beast. Survivors later described a confusing image. Physically, Irma was stunning. Blue eyes, delicate features, angelic hair. She looked like a movie star. But this appearance was a mask. At first glance, an innocent young woman, but in reality, a sadist without a conscience. To the prisoners, there was no beauty, only terror. Why did the prisoners fear her more than the guards? It wasn't just her rank, it was her unpredictability. Every morning, Irma stood at the camp gates. The trains arrived. Thousands of confused people poured onto the ramp. Irma did not look away. She scanned the crowd. She looked for women she found attractive. Beauty was a capital offense. With a cold smile, she pointed them out. She sent them straight to the gas chambers. She eliminated the competition before they even entered the barracks. But death was often too quick. She preferred prolonged suffering. Irma took command of the female prisoners. She forced them into the freezing mud. She assigned endless, grueling tasks, moving heavy stones, digging useless trenches. The temperature dropped, but the work continued. The footage shows prisoners in thin stripes shivering violently. If a woman faltered, Irma reacted instantly. She didn't just yell, she beat them senseless until they stopped moving. The sound of the whip cracking became the background noise of the camp. Fear was the only constant, but physical abuse wasn't enough. Irma escalated the violence. She kept dogs, large aggressive breeds. She didn't just own them, she weaponized them. She deliberately starved the animals for days. Then, she set them loose. The dogs would attack the prisoners. They mauled their victims, tearing flesh from bone. Witnesses report, Irma stood only a few feet away. She watched the carnage with cold satisfaction. She controlled life and death, and she enjoyed the show. Events accelerated. The war turned against the regime. Soviet forces broke through the front lines. The evacuation began. Irma joined the infamous death marches. Thousands of skeletons walked into the winter storm. It was 20 degrees below zero. The column moved slowly. Those who collapsed from exhaustion did not get a second chance. A pistol shot rang out. The body was left in the snow. But even in this chaos, Irma found new ways to inflict pain. She halted the group. She ordered prisoners to strip naked. In the frame, a white frozen field littered with bodies. She forced the naked women to perform impossible physical exercises, jumping jacks, squats. Their hearts gave out. They dropped dead from hypothermia and exhaustion. Irma watched until the last one fell. 1945. The war ended. Her name became synonymous with absolute cruelty. History does not remember her as a beautiful young woman. It remembers a monster. The atrocities at Auschwitz and Ravensbrück left a permanent scar. The legacy of the beautiful beast was written in blood. April 17, 1945. 2 days had passed since the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. British forces swept through the camp, securing the perimeter and rounding up the remaining SS personnel. Among them was Irma Grese. She did not run. She did not hide in the woods. Soldiers escorted her to a waiting transport truck. The destination was the prison camp at Lüneburg. Here, the beautiful beast would face justice for war crimes. The interrogation began immediately. Officers sat across from her in a cold, bare room. They asked a simple question. Why? Why the torture? Why the murders? The footage shows Irma's face is calm, almost bored. There's no trembling in her hands. She replied without hesitation. Her voice was steady. It was our duty to exterminate antisocial elements so that Germany's future would be assured. Why did she show such indifference? It seemed she was merely a soldier following orders, but her conviction went deeper than military discipline. At first glance, a young woman from a quiet village, but in reality, a cold, calculating executioner. The arrogance was chilling. Even as the Third Reich collapsed, even as the smell of burning archives filled the air, Irma remained unrepentant. She fixed her hair. She adjusted her collar. To her, the victims were not people. They were obstacles to a political goal. But this was only the end of the line. To understand how a farmer's daughter transformed into one of the most notorious figures of the Holocaust, we must rewind the tape. We must look beyond the blood-soaked grounds of Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Bergen-Belsen. The investigation required a look into the past. 1936, that was the year Irma's childhood effectively ended. Her mother committed suicide, leaving the family in ruins. But there was no time to mourn. Her father did not offer comfort. He responded with rage. He beat his children. He enforced discipline with his fists. The house filled with the sounds of shouting and the dull thud of blows. Irma internalized these moments. She learned a dark lesson. Authority is established through terror. Why did she embrace the Nazi ideology so quickly? It seemed she was just a traumatized girl, but the regime offered exactly what she lacked: power. The party preached strength. It despised weakness. For Irma, who felt vulnerable and discarded, this was a lifeline. She wanted to be the hammer, not the nail. As she matured, she became the poster child for the Third Reich. She possessed the perfect Aryan look, platinum blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. To the state, she was not just a woman. She was a biological asset, a symbol of racial purity. At first glance, a beautiful farm girl. But in reality, a weapon waiting to be aimed. The regime gave her a uniform and a purpose. But this was only the beginning. Irma's ambition morphed into a hunger for control. She arrived at Ravensbrück concentration camp for training. Here, seasoned female guards taught her the trade. They showed her how to ignore screams, how to strike without hesitation. Irma didn't just learn, she excelled. She treated cruelty as a craft to be mastered. Events accelerated. Her performance earned her a transfer to Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was the epicenter of the Holocaust. Here, she received absolute power over 30,000 female prisoners. The archival footage shows Irma walking the camp perimeter, wearing heavy boots and a pistol. She embraced her role with terrifying enthusiasm. She invented punishments. She forced starving women to kneel in the mud for hours. They had to hold heavy rocks above their heads. If an arm trembled, Irma struck. She used a whip made of cellophane and wire. The blows cut deep. She laughed when they collapsed. She stripped prisoners naked, mocking their bodies, degrading them before the entire camp. But physical pain was not enough. She practiced psychological torture. She stalked the barracks like a predator. She selected victims based on her mood. When the trains arrived, the selections for the gas chambers began. Most guards hated this duty. Irma volunteered for it. Survivors recall the scene clearly. The smell of burning flesh hung in the air. The sound of dogs barking was constant. Amidst the chaos, Irma stood calm. She wore heavy perfume. She hummed popular tunes. With a casual wave of her gloved hand, she sent thousands to their deaths. Left, right, life, death. She specifically targeted those who looked her in the eye. Any spark of defiance was extinguished instantly. She did not just follow orders. She derived pleasure from the destruction. Her beauty remained flawless, but her humanity was gone. She had become the perfect instrument of the state. Absolute dominance. That was the only currency she recognized. Power did not just intoxicate her, it became the foundation of her identity. While prisoners withered away in the barracks, Irma solidified her status. She forged alliances with the camp's elite, including Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death himself. They were often seen together. At first glance, a social connection between colleagues, but in reality, a consolidation of lethal influence. This proximity to the high command emboldened her. She moved through the camp with total impunity. However, her reputation was not built solely on administrative cruelty. It was built on blood. Irma kept personal dogs, 2 large aggressive beasts. She did not feed them. Why did she starve them? To turn them into weapons. A well-fed dog might obey. A starving dog attacks. She released these animals onto the prisoners. It was a game to her. Survivor accounts describe the scene. Inmates torn apart while the guards watched. The sounds of screaming mixed with snarling. Irma did not look away. The violence did not repel her. It excited her. It fed a deep pathological need for control. Even hardened SS officers found her methods excessive. They flinched. Irma smiled. 1944 arrived. The war turned against Germany. Soviet forces closed in on Auschwitz. Artillery fire echoed in the distance. The infrastructure of the Third Reich began to crumble. Most personnel panicked. They burned archives. They prepared to flee. Irma's cruelty did not abate, but the chaos changed nothing. She oversaw the death processions with mechanical efficiency. These were the forced evacuations. Thousands of skeletal figures marched through the freezing winter. The temperature dropped. The snow deepened. The visual evidence is stark. Bodies lining the roadside. Anyone who lagged behind was executed. A single shot to the head. Irma walked the line, weapon in hand. She did not care about the suffering. She was a true believer. In her mind, the survival of Germany required the extermination of the unworthy. There was no hesitation. April 1945. British forces breached the gates of Bergen-Belsen. They entered a nightmare. Piles of rotting corpses blocked the paths. The smell of decay overwhelmed the soldiers. Survivors clung to life, barely moving. And amidst this apocalypse, they found Irma. She did not hide. She stood in her full SS uniform. Her boots were polished. Her posture was rigid. There was no fear in her eyes, only defiance. She did not repent. 1945. She sat in the dock, defiant and unrepentant. Even in captivity, the press called her the beautiful beast. She remained full of self-importance, convinced she had done nothing wrong. To her, the prisoner's dock was not a place of shame. It was a stage. When prosecutors asked about the slaughter of thousands, she did not flinch. She simply shrugged it off. To her, mass murder had been a mere duty. Why did she remain so calm? Perhaps she believed her rank would protect her, but the courtroom quickly filled with the ghosts of her victims. Her trial began later that year. It was a spectacle. The horrors of her actions were laid bare for the global press. Survivor after survivor took the stand. They didn't speak in generalities. They recounted specific horrors, the sound of a whip cracking, the screams in the night, the cold gaze of the woman who beat, tortured, and killed without a flicker of remorse. The evidence against her was irrefutable. It was not just words. It was physical. Piles of camp documents, testimonies from the liberated, mountains of bodies left in her wake. But even in the face of this overwhelming proof, Irma maintained her defense. She claimed she had simply followed orders. In the chilling detachment of her words, she seemed almost unbothered by the horror she had inflicted. The footage shows a young woman with a bored expression adjusting her hair while witnesses weep. At first glance, a confused 22-year-old girl. But in reality, a calculated sadist. She believed she would escape the full consequences of her actions. She thought her age would save her, but fate had other plans. On November 17, 1945, the gavel came down. The British military tribunal delivered its verdict: death by hanging. Events accelerated. She was the youngest woman ever to be executed under British law in the 20th century. The date was set for December 13, 1945. The man assigned to the task was Albert Pierrepoint. He was one of the most experienced executioners in British history. He measured her height, he calculated the drop. There was no room for error. In her final moments, Irma showed no fear. Guards led her from the cell to the execution chamber. Her hands were bound tight behind her back. She stood on the trapdoor. The executioner asked if she had any last words. She did not beg for forgiveness. She reportedly muttered one word: Schnell. Quickly. It was a fitting end, a cold command for a woman who had spent her life exacting brutal violence on the weak. The lever was pulled, the trapdoor released with a loud clatter. Irma Grese, the beautiful beast of Auschwitz, fell through. The rope went taut. Her life was extinguished in a split second. The world would not mourn her death. There were no tears shed for the woman who had sent thousands to the gas chambers. Instead, there was a sense of grim justice, a feeling that at least one of the monsters of Hitler's final solution had been held accountable. But the story did not cut off there. Her actions remain. The horrors she perpetrated and the twisted ideology she embodied serve as a stark reminder. They reveal humanity's potential for evil. Irma Grese was not just a reflection of her time, she was a warning, a symbol of unchecked hatred, a proof of how easily cruelty becomes normalized and how people lose their humanity in the pursuit of dominance. We must never forget, not just for the lives she destroyed, but for the lesson on the fragility of civilization. Thus ended the life of the beautiful beast. 22 years old. That was the age of the monster when the rope finally snapped tight. The execution was swift. The doctor checked the pulse. The body was removed. But the death of Irma Grese marked only the end of a biological life. It did not end the nightmare she left behind. The drop of the trapdoor could not erase the scars on thousands of survivors. It is a chilling realization. Irma was not an anomaly. She was a prototype, and history dictates a terrifying truth. Such monsters can rise again. Was Irma merely a product of her environment? It is easy to blame the Nazi machine. It is easy to say it turned an innocent girl into a killer. But the facts suggest otherwise. She wasn't just a victim of the regime, she was its perfect instrument. In the wake of the Belsen Trial, historians analyzed the files. They tried to pinpoint the moment of transformation. The tragedy is clear. She wasn't born with a whip in her hand. She was made. Yet a distinction exists. Most guards had their humanity stripped away by the war. They drank to forget. They looked away. Irma Grese was different. She seemed to relish the loss of her soul. The archives preserved the testimonies. They are difficult to read. Witnesses describe a young woman walking through the camp. She wears heavy boots. A pistol rests on her hip. She does not look away from the suffering. She looks directly at it. At first glance, a dutiful guard patrolling her sector. But in reality, a predator hunting for sport. It wasn't just compliance, it was enjoyment. Survivors recalled the specific sounds of her presence, the crack of her cellophane whip, the heavy thud of boots against ribs, and something even more disturbing, laughter. She smiled as she beat prisoners. She laughed as they bled. Ideology might have put her in the uniform, but sadism kept her there. By the time of her execution, the human girl was gone. Only the impulse to hurt remained. But this was only the beginning of the horror. She did not just follow orders, she transcended them. She actively sought opportunities to inflict pain. She looked for excuses to punish. For Irma, the concentration camp was not a prison, it was a stage, a playground where she could act out her darkest impulses without consequence. The footage from the courtroom shows a woman unbothered. She adjusts her hair, she ignores the translators. There is no guilt in her eyes. We must ask a hard question. Was any part of her still human? She had a past. She was once a confused teenager on a dairy farm. She was desperate for acceptance, hungry for status. The brutal world of the Third Reich shaped her. It gave her a uniform and power. But there was a point of divergence, a specific moment where she could have turned back. Most people would hesitate before striking a defenseless person. Irma did not hesitate. She chose evil. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't naivety. She understood the pain she caused. Other guards, equally indoctrinated, often broke down. They vomited. They requested transfers. They struggled with the brutality. Irma took pleasure in it. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a willing participant, perhaps even an enthusiastic one. That is the core of the terror. She was not just another cog in the Nazi war machine. She was the fuel that kept it burning. Thus ended the life of the beautiful beast, 22 years old. That was the age of the woman who became the nightmare of the camps. While others claimed they were swept away by history, Irma Grese made a choice. She did not stumble into brutality. She embraced it. She became one of the most notorious figures in the entire SS hierarchy. But the archives reveal a disturbing contradiction. In photographs, she looks harmless, blonde curls, blue eyes, a fresh, youthful face. At first glance, an innocent girl next door, but in reality, a sadist without equal. This contrast was her primary weapon. Prisoners froze when they saw her. They expected mercy from such a soft face. They received only pain. The deception increased the terror. She was the type of operator who could smile warmly while signaling a guard to execute a prisoner. Why did she target the women? It wasn't just policy. It was jealousy. Reports confirm a disturbing pattern. If a prisoner retained any beauty or dignity, Irma marked her for destruction. She despised their grace. She saw her own insecurities in their faces. She could not dominate their spirit, so she destroyed their bodies. The footage shows Irma standing on the selection platform. She wears heavy black boots. She holds a braided whip. With a slight smile, she points to the left, to the gas chambers. She controlled life and death with a flick of her wrist, but simple execution was too boring. She escalated the violence. Grese kept half-starved dogs in the camp kennels. She deliberately withheld food for days. Then she released them. The sound of snapping jaws, the screams of the victims. She did not look away. She watched the animals tear prisoners apart with cold satisfaction. It was not duty, it was sport. Then came the reckoning. Irma Grese stood trial at Lüneburg. It was a global spectacle. The world demanded justice, but Grese remained defiant. The camera records, she sits in the defendant's box, she adjusts her hair, she looks bored. Survivors took the stand and testified about murdered families. Irma did not flinch. She showed no remorse, she barely listened. When the judge demanded an explanation, she offered the standard defense. She claimed she was just following orders, a cog in the machine. But the witnesses proved otherwise. She had gone far beyond any orders. The court delivered its verdict.